The forest pressed close on both sides of the trail, branches knitting overhead like they were trying to hide the sky. By the time the tower finally came into view, a narrow, skeletal structure of metal and wood rising from a bald patch of rock, the air felt thicker, like it had been filtered through too many layers of trees. The letter had called this place Outpost 7, but the sign at the base of the tower just said Station. The rest of the paint had peeled away. There was a laminated sheet nailed under the sign, warped by rain and sun. It had a list of regulations printed in block letters. Most of it was what the training manuals had already covered. Log every storm. Report every column of smoke. Check in twice daily. But about halfway down was a section outlined in red pen. Someone had drawn the box by hand. Inside it, written in the same heavy strokes, was a separate list. Do not use the lamp after 1:13 a.m. Do. Answer the third knock. Do not trust the binoculars. At the bottom, in thinner writing that looked like it had been added later, was one more line. Do not wave first. There was no explanation. No signature. Just those rules, hanging there in the still air. The tower stairs creaked under each step. The higher the climb, the more the forest opened up, rolling away in every direction, a dark sea of treetops broken only by distant ridges. The cabin at the top was smaller than expected, just one room with windows on all sides. A narrow bed pushed into a corner, a wood stove, a radio, an ancient desk. And a single metal chair. On the desk lay a logbook, a weathered pair of binoculars, and a folded sheet of paper weighed down by a rusted compass. The note was short. Everything you need is here. Follow the posted rules. They're not jokes. There was no name, no date, just a deep indentation at the bottom of the page, as though whoever wrote it had pressed the pen too hard and then changed their mind. About signing, the first few days passed like the training said they would. Morning check-in with the ranger station. Scan the horizon for smoke. Record wind direction, cloud cover, visibility. Hike down to clear brush on the southern trail. Eat whatever came out of the supply crate. Try to sleep through the groaning complaints of the tower shifting in the wind. The rhythm settled in quickly. Wake before sunrise. Heat coffee on the stove. Watch mist rise from the canopy. Listen to the radio hiss and pop until it finally crackled to life with the same calm voice from the station. No fires, no alerts. Just a reminder to log everything and call in anything strange. On the third night, the strange made itself known. It started as a soft tapping. 1, 2, 3 against the glass. The clock on the wall read 12:41 a.m. Outside the windows, the forest was just a black mass broken by threads of starlight. The lamp on the desk was set low, throwing a dim circle of yellow over the logbook. The tapping came again. 1, 2, 3. There was no wind. The branches around the tower barely moved. Moths fluttered against one corner of the glass, but this sound was different, more deliberate. Not frantic, like an insect. Not random, like loose hardware. It sounded like knuckles. The radio was silent. The night was otherwise empty. The tapping came a third time. 1, 2, 3. The rules on the sign at the base of the tower surfaced in memory. Do not answer the third knock. There was no second knock, no fourth, just those evenly spaced sets of 3. After the 4th round, the hand went to the lamp's switch. The light went out with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet room. Darkness flooded in, thick and immediate. The tapping stopped. The rest of the night, nothing else happened. No footsteps on the stairs. No whisper of movement below. Just the occasional groan of the tower adjusting to minor temperature shifts. By dawn, it felt almost silly, like a half-remembered dream that never managed to fully form. The logbook entry for that night was short, unidentified knocking at window. Multiple sets of 3. Did not respond. The radio operator at the station didn't react when it was mentioned during the morning check-in. There was just a pause, the faint crackle of static, and then the same steady voice. Continue to follow posted guidelines. Log any further activity, no questions, no surprise, no offer of explanation. The next week slid past slowly, the days blending together, the forest becoming familiar in a way that made small changes stand out sharply. Crows gathered on the western ridge one afternoon, hundreds of them, forming a black line that followed the tree line and then dissipated all at once. The wind shifted directions 3 times during a single storm, circling the tower like something walking laps around it. Once, while scanning the horizon at dusk, a figure was seen on a distant rise, just a silhouette against the last strip of light, standing perfectly still. The binoculars were raised and focused in, but when the lens finally sharpened on that patch of hill, there was nothing there. Just scrub and rock and the thin outline of a dead tree. The rules on the sign below began to feel less like rustic superstition and more like something else. Not advice. Not guidelines, boundaries. The lamp rule came next. The tower lamp was old, with a heavy glass shade and a metal base scarred by decades of use. It hummed faintly when turned up brighter, the way older bulbs sometimes did. Every night, it was switched off just before midnight out of habit, well before the posted limit of 1:13 a.m. on the 10th night. Though the logbook ran long, a storm had rolled in at sunset, a slow, sullen procession of clouds that stacked over the northern ridge and then sagged, refusing to fully break. Lightning pulsed inside them like a heartbeat. Rain hissed lightly against the glass. Not heavy enough to obscure visibility, but constant enough to be distracting. There had been reports of dry lightning starting spot. Fires to valleys over the week before. The station operator had asked for extra vigilance tonight. Midnight came and went. The lamp stayed on. The second hand on the wall clock traced a perfect circle. The storm stayed put. At 1:05 a.m., sleep burned at the edges of vision. The words in the logbook blurred. The pen felt heavy. The lamp's hum sank into the background of awareness, coming a kind of white noise. At 1:13 a.m., the tower forgot to breathe. The storm vanished. There was no gradual shift, no thinning of rain. One moment the glass shimmered with water and distant lightning. The next, the sky outside the windows was clear and empty, a black bowl pricked with stars. The air in the cabin felt suddenly dry, as if someone had wrung the moisture. Out of it, the lamp's hum grew louder. There was movement in the glass. It didn't come from outside. Where branches should have swayed and shadows should have moved with the wind, it came from the reflections, from the duplicate room floating in every window pane. At first, it was just a sense that the angles were wrong. The reflection of the desk seemed slightly off-center. The reflection of the bed looked a little too far from the wall. The reflection of the lamp burned a touch too bright. Then the reflection of the tower. Watchers shifted. The body in the chair remained perfectly still, one hand on the logbook, the other resting on the desk. But in the window to the left, the reflected version tilted its head. Just a fraction. Just enough to see. The breath locked in the throat. Every instinct said, "Do not move." The clock ticked. The pen lay motionless under the watching hand. In the glass, the other hand twitched. The reflected figure's fingers tapped once on the desk. The real fingers did not move. A cold, thin line of panic drew itself along the spine. The lamp's hum deepened into a low, vibrating tone that seemed to settle into the bones of the tower. Every surface felt like it was ringing. The head in the reflection tilted further, slow and curious, like someone studying a specimen. The eyes in the glass were too dark, too hollow, as though the light from the lamp couldn't quite reach them. The rule came back like a shout, "Do not trust the binoculars." The warning seemed absurd in that moment. The binoculars rested beside the logbook, in the same pool of light as the pen and compass. But in the reflection, they were not on the desk. They were around the neck of the figure in the chair. The fingers in the glass traced, the curve of them thoughtfully. The urge to look away, to turn and face the real room instead of its distorted duplicate, was almost unbearable. But some instinct, deep and insistent, held the body still. Eyes fixed on the edge of the reflection. Instead of its center, the clock ticked from 1:13 to 1:14. The lamp flickered. When the light steadied, the reflection matched reality again. Same posture. Same objects. Same empty, motionless stare. The storm outside returned in the same sudden, jarring way it had left. Thunder rolled over the tower a moment later, delayed but real. Rain beaded on the glass, smearing the remaining afterimages. The lamp switch was hit with trembling fingers. Darkness rushed in, almost comforting in its totality. Sleep did not come for the rest of the night. But dawn eventually did. The logbook entry that morning was not precise. The words felt clumsy, too small for what had filled the cabin. Lamp left on past 1:13. A.M. Reflections inconsistent with reality. Perceived movement not mirrored in actual body. Possible visual distortion, fatigue, or something else. Lamp will be kept off at or before midnight from now on. The station's reply over the radio, after a long pause, was to instruct stricter adherence to posted regulations and to avoid engaging with visual anomalies. The last phrase sounded rehearsed. No one asked for clarification. For a while, nothing escalated. Days became a stack of nearly identical pages in the log. Temperature, wind, visibility, no smoke, birds, clouds, quiet. The forest seemed to breathe on a slow, even rhythm that could almost be trusted, but the sense of being watched grew in the empty spaces between tasks at first. It was vague, a prickle between the shoulder blades when crossing the cabin. The feeling of eyes on the back of the neck when standing at the northern window too long. Then it migrated to specific spots. The corner under the bed felt wrong after sundown, like the shadows there were a little too deep. The square of floor by the trapdoor to the stairs had a way of drawing the gaze at night, as if something might be just on the other side, waiting patiently. Once, while reaching for a mug on the shelf, one of the photographs pinned to the wall, an old image of the tower in winter, shifted slightly. Not enough to fall, just enough to hang crooked. The air had been still. The window was closed, no obvious explanation presented. Itself, the third rule waited. Do not answer the third knock. The first time the knocking had come, it had been on the glass. A soft tapping, easily dismissed as branches or birds or the structure itself complaining. The second time, it was on the door at the base of the tower. It came just after sunset, when the sky still held a band of bruised purple over the tree line. The radio had been quiet all afternoon. The sound rose up through the floor like a heartbeat carried along the metal frame. 1, 2, 3. Then the body went still, the pencil hovering over the logbook, the ears strained. The forest outside had gone curiously flat, no insect buzz, no bird calls, just the low, endless rush of distant wind. The knocking came again. 1, 2, 3. The instinct, drilled in from training, was to respond to any possible human contact in the area. Hikers sometimes got lost. Hunters sometimes pushed too far. Injuries happened. People knocked when they needed help. The hand reached for the radio, thumb brushing the worn call button, but did not press. The rules on the sign at the base of the stairs dragged at the mind, like an anchor dot. Do not answer the third knock. This was the second set. If the pattern held, the third was coming. The thought formed slowly, like something being written from the inside out. Answering could mean a lot of things. It might mean opening the door. It might just mean calling out. It might mean acknowledging. Admitting you heard, admitting there is something. There the knocking came a third time. This time it wasn't on the door. It was on the trapdoor under the cabin floor. The sound came from directly beneath the chair. The entire tower seemed to vibrate with it, the metal bolts humming faintly in the walls, the window panes shivering almost imperceptibly. 1, 2, 3. The throat tightened. The urge to speak, just to say something simple, something neutral like "who's there," rose like bile. The words felt hot and sour on the tongue. Silence held. The knocking stopped. The logbook stayed open, the entry half finished. The radio remained untouched on the desk. The minutes crawled by. Eventually, the clock ticked past midnight. Nothing else happened. By morning, the only evidence that anything had been there at all was a faint circular pattern of dust on the trapdoor handle, like something had traced it in slow, deliberate arcs. The entry that day was concise, almost clinical, 3 sets of 3 knocks. Location shifted from outer door to trapdoor below cabin. No verbal response. No visual confirmation of source. The station operator's reply was shorter than usual. Continued to comply with protocol. Maintain position. There was a tremor in the last word that had never been there before. The forest began to change in small, disorienting ways. Distances shifted. The Southern Trail, which took 20 minutes to hike on the first day, stretched into 30, then 40. Landmarks seemed to move. A fallen log used to mark the halfway point suddenly appeared closer to the tower. A boulder that always sat just off a tight bend in the path wasn't there one morning, only to reappear farther down 2 days later. Branches on certain trees grew in strange directions, bending away from a particular hollow, twisting toward the tower like they were reaching. Time slipped. Watches disagreed with the wall clock. The radio check-ins sometimes came earlier than scheduled, sometimes late, yet the voice on the other end insisted it was right on time. Sunsets felt wrong, either lingering too long or dropping too fast. Once, the sun seemed to set twice. It sank behind the western ridge, painting the forest in gold and orange. Then after the sky darkened to deep blue, it climbed back into view, again a pale, blurred disk behind thin clouds, before finally disappearing for the night. The logbook recorded it as a possible atmospheric illusion. The handwriting for that entry was uneven. Sleep became difficult. When sleep finally came, it was thin and restless, filled with dreams that felt like misfiled memories. There were images of walking the perimeter of the clearing at the tower's base in the dead of night, of running fingers along the support beams, of pressing an ear to the metal legs and listening for something moving inside them. There were flashes of standing at the tree line, staring up at the cabin light from below, watching a silhouette pace back and forth in the glass. Sometimes, the dream I looked up and realized the figure in the windows wasn't moving like a tired observer, but like something trying to learn how to imitate. Mornings came with the ghost of those movements. Still clinging to the bones, the radio operator's voice. Once a small comfort began to feel thin and far away, like it was coming from somewhere, not quite aligned with the world outside the tower. Instances of static breaks became more frequent. In the middle of routine exchanges, the words would smear into a low, rising hiss that sounded almost like whispering if the speaker were pressed. Close to the radio on one particularly clear afternoon, while noting a small column of smoke on the far eastern horizon, a controlled burn logged by the station earlier that day, the radio clicked on by itself, no call sign. No greeting, just a voice, not the usual one, speaking in a tone that was too calm, too slow. Do you see it? A hand reached for the volume dial, fingers slick with sweat. The question came again, identical in cadence. Do you see it? There was nothing out of the ordinary in the field of vision trees, hills, the faintest smear of distant smoke. No movement. No figures. No lights. The urge to answer pressed hard from the inside. A compulsion that didn't feel like obedience so much as a reflex. Like coughing when something goes down wrong. The mouth opened. Negative, it said. Voice hoarse. The radio clicked off instantly. As though the act of speaking had completed some circuit, the logbook sat open on the desk. The pen moved on its own almost, writing the words before they could be decided unconsciously. Do not respond to unverified voices. The rules were multiplying. At some point, new ones began appearing physically. It was subtle at first. A scrap of paper tucked into the logbook that hadn't been there before, with a single line scrawled across it. Face away from the mirror after midnight. There were no mirrors in the tower, but there was glass. For walls of it, the note was burned in the stove without comment. 2 days later, another scrap appeared. This time tucked into the folded blanket at the foot of the bed. If you see yourself outside, stay inside. No one had written it. No one had climbed those stairs without being heard. Yet there it was, the ink still fresh enough to smear shelves, drawers under the pillow. Slipped between pages of old weather charts each day brought a new fragment. Do not wave first. Do not look directly at the thing behind you. Do not count the stairs at night. After a while, they were everywhere. Not all of them made sense. Some sounded like nonsense, like the tail ends of sentences overheard. In someone else's argument, leave the third step. Alone. Walls are thinner when you sleep. It remembers the last. 1. The tower began to feel less like a structure and more like a mind, cluttered with intrusive thoughts. On a gray, low-ceilinged afternoon, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Clouds sat heavy on the forest, like wet wool. The world outside the tower windows became a featureless white, as if the cabin had been lifted out of the real landscape and hung in some empty space. The radio crackled, then died. No amount of tinkering with the knobs brought it back. The usual backup channels were dead air. The storm never fully materialized. No lightning, no rain, just endless, suffocating fog. By late evening, the edges of the cabin felt indistinct. Looking directly at the bed made it sharp and real. Letting it sit at the edge of vision fuzzed it out, like it was being erased softly, pencil marks rubbed with a thumb. The same was true of the stove, the chair, the trapdoor. The logbook stayed real as long as a hand stayed on it. The clock on the wall ticked, but the hands were out of step with the rhythm. Sometimes the second hand jumped backward. Sometimes it stopped entirely and then lurched forward in erratic bursts. There was a sound outside. Not the wind. Not an animal. It was a faint, breathy exhale. Like someone had pressed their mouth to the glass and fogged a small circle in the condensation. Then, through the fog beyond the northern window, a shape appeared. At first, it was just a darker patch, a slightly denser shade of gray. Then it pulled into the suggestion of shoulders, a head, arms hanging loosely at the sides. It stood just at the edge of visibility, far enough away that no details were clear. Close enough that the mind insisted on filling them in. It was facing the tower, against all better judgment. The binoculars were lifted. They felt heavier than they should, the strap leaving a thin burning line across the back of the neck. The lenses focused slowly, the world flattening into the narrow circle of magnification. The fog within that circle parted just enough to show the figure it had a face. Not a monstrous one, not twisted or bleeding or wrong in some grotesque physical way. The horror was that it was almost right. It was the same face that looked back from the mirror, not an exact copy, an echo. The features were arranged correctly, but there were small errors, like someone had drawn from memory and gotten lazy in the last minutes. The eyes were a little too close together. The mouth didn't quite line up with the nose. The expression was slack in an uncanny way, as if the muscles weren't used to holding a shape. The figure raised one hand. Fingers separating slowly, deliberately it waved. The binoculars stayed up. Breath sawed shallowly, in and out. The hand holding the lenses shook. The rule surfaced through the rising tide of panic. Do not wave first. Nothing had been said about what to do if something else. Did the figure's hand moved back and forth in a mechanical arc, like a child practicing the motion? The elbow bent a fraction of a second too late each time. The urge to respond just to lift a hand, to acknowledge the gesture, to prove being seen gnawed at muscle and bone. The binoculars pulled away from the eyes with painful effort. Without the lenses, the figure blurred again into a gray smudge. The hand stayed at the side. It did not lift. The thing in the fog kept waving for a long time. Eventually, it stopped. The fog swallowed it whole. The radio came back with a soft click an hour later. The station's voice sounded distant, distorted at the edges. Station confirmed status. The lips felt dry. The voice that came out sounded like it belonged to someone else. Station operational. Visual anomaly in northern quadrant. No response given. A long stretch of static followed. That's good, the operator said at last, the relief in the tone unmistakable. Last one. Made contact. The question rose instinctively. Last one. The static swallowed the rest of the reply. Only fragments made it through. Didn't follow. Rules went down. The logbook got a new entry that night, the handwriting tight and small. There was someone here before. The notes are not all mine. Sleep did not come at all. In the days that followed, the tower itself began to betray the senses. The stairs felt steeper one morning, the angle of descent sharper than memory said it should be. The legs burned more, climbing back up, even though the number of steps, carefully counted in daylight, never changed at night. The rule against counting them became less abstract. Once, on a late return from clearing storm debris along the southern trail, darkness fell faster than expected. Clouds stacked up over the hills, swallowing the last streaks of sunset. The trees pressed in close on both sides of the path, their trunks becoming vertical bars in a prison with no ceiling. By the time the tower came into view, just a black cutout against a darker sky, the breath was coming hard and fast. The flashlight's beam jittered with each step, picking out patches of dirt, roots, stones. The base of the tower felt like a sanctuary. The first step groaned underfoot, then the second. Then the third, except it was. The mind knew the third step always had a distinctive notch in the wood, little groove worn by decades of boots. This one was smooth, newer, wrong. The flashlight beam slid across the riser. The wood grain didn't match. There was another rule, one that had seemed nonsensical. When it appeared on a scrap of paper under the pillow, leave the third step alone. The breath hitched. The body backed down carefully, stepping onto solid ground. The tower loomed overhead, a familiar skeleton suddenly strangers to its own joints. The beam was aimed higher. Up along the stairs, tracing each step, there it was, the real third step. 4 risers up instead of 3, with its familiar groove. The gap between the second and the real third was wrong, too tall. Like something had stretched that section of the staircase, then painted over the seam. The false third step sat in between, waiting. Patient. The mind refused to imagine what might have happened if a foot had come down full weight on it. The second rule: do not answer the third knock. It always seemed metaphorical, about patterns and invitations. Standing at the bottom of the tower, heart pounding, it became suspiciously literal. Something in this place liked thirds. The climb, when it finally resumed, skipped the false step with exaggerated care. The cabin felt different when the hatch was pushed open. The air was too still, the way a room gets when someone has been inside it for a while, with the windows closed, breathing quietly. Waiting, the logbook lay open on the desk, the pen rested where it had been left, except the page had changed. The last entry, written that morning about routine wind shifts in the absence of visible smoke, had been crossed out, not with a single angry line, but with dozens of them, tight and overlapping, turning the words into a dense, dark block of ink. Below it, in a different hand, was a new sentence. "You're late." The radio remained silent the entire night. Panic and logic traded places every few minutes. One moment, the mind was sure this was some elaborate trick of isolation-induced breakdown, some loop of perception feeding back on itself. The next was equally sure there was something actively rearranging the world inside, and just outside the tower. The only constant was the rules, even when they made no sense, even when they seemed specifically tailored to provoke dread. Following them felt like the only thread of control left. Do not use the lamp after 1:13 a.m. The lamp stayed off. Candles, when used, were snuffed by midnight. Do not answer the third knock. No matter how persuasive the sounds became, no matter how much they began to mimic human distress, they were met with silence. Do not trust the binoculars. The lenses gathered dust. The neck strap stayed coiled, untouched. Do not wave first. When figures appeared at the tree line, sometimes resembling known shapes, sometimes blurred and shifting, they were watched but never greeted. Gradually, the forest's intrusions grew frustrated. The knocks became louder, more frequent, sometimes coming in rapid strings of threes that left the bolts in the floor trembling. Once, something called the name that had been signed on the original assignment papers. It got the pronunciation exactly right, the tone perfect, the cadence familiar, as if someone close were standing just below the hatch. "Open up. It's me. They sent me to relieve you early," the tongue wanted to answer. The throat wanted to form words. Instead, the jaw locked. The hatch stayed closed. Later, a new note appeared on the pillow. Good. Days stretched. Time blurred. The radio, when it worked, spoke rarely. The station's voice grew more strained, more distant. "How are you holding up?" The question always came near the end of the check-in. The honest answer would have been complicated. Reality is fraying at the edges. The forest is learning. The rules are evolving. And sometimes the face in the window looks back before the head is turned. The logged response was always the same, operational. The tower watched. The forest watched back. One evening, near the end of what the calendar said was the second month, but what felt like a year, something changed. The supply plane, which usually droned overhead every 7 days, did not arrive. The crate at the usual drop point never materialized. The radio stayed eerily quiet at the scheduled time. No apology. No reschedule. Just absence. Food stores were not yet desperate. But the break in routine hit like a physical blow. The tower had existed for weeks on the premise. That the outside world still functioned. That this post was part of a larger grid of human activity. The missing crate freed a terrible new possibility into the room. That the grid had broken. That this place was now its own sealed system. The forest seemed to sense the shift that night. The knocks came differently, not in threes, in ones. Single, heavy impacts, spaced far apart. Each one made the bunk frame shudder, the window glass quiver. They came from all directions at once, door, wall, hatch. Floor like something immense was testing the boundaries, pressing gently but insistently. The rules did not cover this pattern. Silence. Once a shield began to feel thin, the mind spun through options. Call the station and risk hearing nothing. Open the hatch and risk seeing something waiting. Talk and risk answering a knock that wasn't technically the third, but might be close enough. In the end, instinct picked the least worst option. The logbook was pulled in front of shaking hands. A new entry was written in large, deliberate letters. "I acknowledge you." The knock stopped. The radio came to life. It wasn't the station's voice. It wasn't any voice that had been heard before. It sounded like a chorus of whispers. Layered and pulled through static, bits of familiar cadence tangled up with stranger notes. "Good, you're learning." Every hair on the body stood on end. The tower suddenly felt too small, too high, too exposed. "What do you want?" The mouth asked, the words out before they could be reeled back. The answer came with no hesitation. "Stay where you are. Keep watching. We like it when you watch." Forest outside was impossibly still. It took a moment to realize the implication. The rules had never been about staying safe. They had been about staying in place. About keeping a human mind at the top of this narrow structure. Eyes trained outward, focused on small, manageable duties, while reality slowly rewrote itself around them. Something out there wanted a witness, not to be stopped, not to be fought, to be seen, to be understood. To be recorded, the logbook, thick with pages of weather and smoke and anomalies, had been the real offering all along. Why? The voice on the radio asked next, as if reading the thought, or making fun of it. The throat felt raw. Because if someone is watching, the tower watcher whispered into the empty room, then it means this is still real. The whispers rustled like dry leaves. So watch. The radio clicked off the next morning. Supply plane returned. The crate landed at the usual spot, packed with the usual rations. The station's voice came through at the usual time, a little too cheery, insisting last week's misdrop had been due to routing issues. The dates on the packaged food suggested otherwise. Back inside the cabin, a new page lay on the desk, not in the logbook. Beside it, clean white paper, edges sharp, at the top in neat block letters was a new heading. Rules for the next one. Beneath it, the pen hovered. The forest waited. The first line wrote itself. Do not use the lamp after 1:13 a.m. The second followed. The letters steady. Do not answer the third knock. The hand did not pause. Do not trust the binoculars. Outside the windows, the tree line stood quiet against the sky. The fourth rule came last. The words heavier than the ink, do not assume you are alone. The page was placed at the front of the logbook, just under the cover, where a future hand would find it first. The tower watcher sat back in the chair, eyes drawn to the glass, to the forest beyond, to the subtle twists in the branches and the places where the light curved wrong. The job was simple. On paper, watch for smoke. Log what is seen, report anything that looks off. The rest of it, the knocks, the reflections, the false steps and shifting. Distances and rules that multiplied like thoughts in a sleepless brain that was never in the manual. Somewhere. Out in the tree line, something shifted, a faint movement, a suggestion of a shape. No wave came. The hand did not lift. The pencil reached instead for the margin of the logbook and wrote, in small, careful letters, it sees me. I see it. We are both pretending that this is normal. The radio crackled softly, like laughter trying not to be heard. Night fell slowly. The lamp went out at 1:12 a.m.